Order of operations. So our order of operations is, we remember our little saying of please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Now remember, P is for, we'll just write that, parentheses, E is for exponents. My dear is for multiply or division. And then A and S stands for addition and subtraction. Now let's go over the first example with keeping the order of operations in mind. So we have 5/6 times 3/5 minus 1/5 squared. So technically this 1/5, we don't really have to do anything inside the parentheses, so we don't have to do that because there's no operations within it. But there is an exponent on it. So let's go ahead and deal with the exponents. That's the next thing on our list. So when we go ahead and do that, we go 5/6 times 3/5 minus, we have 1 over 5. And then we're going to square both. So when we go ahead and do that, it's 5/6 times 3/5 minus 1 squared is just 1. And then 5 squared is 5 times 5, so that's just 25. So now we've dealt with our exponents. Our next thing we need to deal with is to multiply and divide. So we can see that we need to do this. So we're going to go ahead and multiply the top together, and we're going to multiply the bottom together. But before we do that, though, we notice we have some common factors from the numerator and the denominator. So we have a 5 here and a 5 here. So these can just cross out and they both become 1, because 5 over 5 is just 1. So we remove a whole factor of 5. Now we see a 3 and a 6. So they each have a factor of 3. 6 divided by 3 is 2. 3 divided by 1. 3 divided by 3 is 1. So now we've dealt with that. We can go ahead and now multiply. So we have this 1 times 1, which is just 1, and then we have 2. We'll just do this, 2 times 1. So we get, we're going to put it all the way back over here. So we have 1 over 2 minus 1 over 25. So our next thing will be, as we've dealt with our multiplication, is to subtract. So how we can subtract is we're just going to go ahead and multiply both sides by each other's denominator. So we are going to multiply 25 on the top and bottom to 1/2, and we're going to go 2 over 2. Now we do this as our least common denominator is 50. So next we need to multiply. We need to multiply the top numbers together, and we'll multiply the bottom numbers together. So 1 times 25 is, erase that, is 25, and our common denominator is 50, minus 1 times 2 is 2 over 50. So now we can go ahead and subtract. Now we only subtract, so we subtract 25 minus 2, which is equal to 23 over 50, as we subtract the numerators, and then we keep the denominator. Let's look at another example. Example 2. Solve for the following. So we have 3/4 plus 1/2 squared divided by 1/2, and then absolute value of 1/8 minus 1/4. So we need to remember our order of operations, so we'll write it. So our first thing we need to deal with is parentheses. So we remember that absolute values also are part of the parentheses step. So our first thing is to solve for this. So when we go ahead and do that, we're going to go ahead and rewrite this. So we'll go 3/4 1/2 squared divided by 1/2 absolute value. So we have 1/8 minus 1/4. Now, the quickest way to get to the same denominator is just to multiply this 4 by 2. So we're going to multiply the top and bottom by 2. And this will get us to our common denominator of 8. And the reason we did this was because our least common denominator between those two, because we can go 4, 8, 12, and then 8 is just 8, 16. So we can see that 8 was our common denominator. Next, let's go ahead and multiply that all out. So we have 3/4 plus 1/2 squared divided by 1/2 absolute value 1/8 minus 2/8, because 1 times 2 is 2. So now we have 1 minus 2 when we deal with our inside this absolute value sign. And so we're going to get, when we go 1 minus 2 is equal to negative 1/8. But it's also in our absolute value sign. So it's just going to become positive. So when we go ahead and rewrite this, we can just go ahead and write positive 1/8. And this is because the absolute value sign made it positive. And now you can see we just left it in parentheses. So we've dealt with our parentheses step. Our next thing will be to deal with is our exponents. So we can see we have an exponent here. So we're going to go ahead and address that. So we have 3/4 plus, now 1/2 squared. When you go 1/2 squared, it's really just going 1 squared over 2 squared. And this is equal to 1 times 1 is 1. 2 times 2 is 4. So we have 1/4. So we can go ahead and just rewrite that. Divided by 1/2 times 1/8. Now our next step will be, as we dealt with exponents, which is what we did right here, we're going to go ahead and multiply and divide. So we see we have a division sign here, and we also see we need to multiply these together. So let's go ahead and first multiply. So we have 3/4 plus 1/4 divided by, so when we go ahead and multiply, we have 1 times 1, so that's equal to 1, and then 2 times 8 is equal to 16. Next, since we dealt with our multiplication, we need to divide. And so how we divide fractions is like before. So we're going to go ahead and go 3/4 plus 1/4. We're actually going to change that division to multiplication and multiply it by its reciprocal. So we're going to go ahead and go 16/1. So now we can go ahead and multiply. So when we multiply the top and then we multiply the bottom. So let's go ahead and multiply. So when we multiply, we deal with 1 times 16. So first let's write that. So 1 times 16 is 16. 4 times 1 is 4. Now we're going to go ahead and do our last step, which will be to add. So we just add 3 plus 16, which is equal to 19/4, as we're going to keep our denominator. And this would be our solution to this problem.